A single candle burned in the darkness beneath Old Town, and its flame seemed far too small for the room it illuminated. The light touched shelves that vanished into shadow, glimmered across links of gold and silver and iron, and reflected briefly in the black eyes of ravens perched high among ancient beams. Beyond those walls rose the high tower, older than memory, its beacon casting a pale glow over whispering sound. Somewhere beneath the city, behind locked doors and forgotten passages, knowledge slept. Some of it was written in books, some of it lived only in whispers, and some of it may have been hidden deliberately. This night, as you settle into the slow rhythm of a journey through Westeros, our path leads into one of the greatest mysteries in all of George R. Martin's world. The hidden truth about the Citadel and its Maesters. If you have traveled these roads before, quietly note which night of the journey this is for you. If you are new among us, let this be night one. The story ahead concerns no dragon battle, no famous king, no great siege. Instead, it concerns knowledge itself. Because in a realm where armies clash and dynasties rise and fall, the people who preserve information often wield a different kind of power. Why did the greatest center of learning in Westeros emerge in Old Town rather than King's Landing Dragonstone or some vanished city of the East? The question seems simple until you begin following the threads backward through history. Long before Aegon Targaryen crossed the narrow sea with Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes, Old Town already stood upon the southwestern coast of Westeros. Before the Iron Throne existed, before the Seven Kingdoms were united, before the dragons of Valyria ever cast their shadows across the continent, ships were entering Old Town's harbor. Merchants came from the Summer Isles, from the free cities, and from distant lands whose names survive only in fragments. While younger cities struggled into existence, Old Town endured. The city belonged to House Hightower, one of the oldest noble lineages in Westeros. The Hightowers ruled from the immense fortress known simply as the Hightower, a colossal structure rising from Battle Isle at the mouth of the Honeywine. According to the world of ice and fire, the lower portions of the High Tower rest upon foundations made from fused black stone, a material that appears elsewhere in strange corners of the known world. The same mysterious substance is found in places such as Ashai by the Shadow and the ruined city of Yin in Sithorios. No Maester has ever offered a fully convincing explanation for who created it. The stone appears ancient beyond measure, older than the Andals, older than the kingdoms that later claimed these shores. That detail becomes more interesting the longer you think about it. The Citadel, the greatest institution of scholarship in Westeros, grew directly beside one of the oldest mysteries in the world. Every novice arriving to begin his studies passed beneath the shadow of a tower whose deepest origins remained unknown. Every Archmaester walked daily beside evidence that some chapters of history had vanished long before recorded memory. It is a curious foundation for an institution devoted to understanding the past. The Citadel presents itself as a place where ignorance is defeated through study, yet its own home stands atop questions that nobody has answered. And Old Town itself carried the weight of countless ages. During the Dawn Age, legends claim that the first men settled the region. Thousands of years later came the Andal migrations, when warriors carrying 7-pointed stars crossed the narrow sea and transformed much of southern Westeros. The reach changed, the riverlands changed, the Vale changed, yet Old Town survived each upheaval. By the time the Targaryens arrived in 2 BC and later began Aegon's conquest in 1 AC, Old Town was already ancient. King Aegon I eventually received the blessing of the faith in the city and was crowned beneath the starry sept, further strengthening Old Town's status as one of the most important centers of power in the realm. But another institution shared that influence. The Citadel was not a royal palace. It commanded no armies, its walls contained no dragon pit, yet every great house sought its services. Every lord desired a Maester. Every castle relied upon knowledge preserved within its halls. The institution achieved something remarkable over centuries. It became indispensable without becoming visibly dominant. Kings feared rival kings. Lords watched rival lords. Meanwhile, the Citadel quietly positioned its servants inside nearly every important castle in Westeros. Why would noble families trust the Citadel with such extraordinary access? The answer begins with the chain. A boy who entered the Citadel surrendered much of his former identity. He studied for years, sometimes decades. He learned medicine, astronomy, mathematics, history, language, engineering, ravenry, and countless specialized disciplines, represented through different metals forged into links. Black iron symbolized raven lore. Yellow gold represented economics. Silver signified medicine. Each link required mastery. Each link had to be earned. By the time a novice became a master, he had been shaped by the institution more thoroughly than by the family that had birthed him. The symbolism mattered. A maester wore his chain every day of his life. The chain rested against the skin while he advised lords, treated wounds, delivered children, and sent ravens across the realm. It reminded him of his training. It reminded others of his authority. Most importantly, it reminded everyone that his first loyalty belonged not to a house, but to his vows. A Stark Maester was not truly a Stark. A Lannister Maester was not truly a Lannister. The chain represented service above blood. Or at least that was the ideal. History reveals how difficult such neutrality can be. Human beings do not become emotionless simply because they swear oaths. They form friendships. They develop preferences. They carry old loyalties. Later generations would witness Grand Maester Pycelle becoming deeply attached to Lord Tywin Lannister, a relationship that shaped events at King's Landing during the reigns of Aerys II, Robert I, and Joffrey Baratheon. Yet even before Pycelle's era, the question lingered. Could any institution truly train thousands of men and send them throughout the realm without developing influence of its own? The Citadel insisted it served the realm. Critics occasionally wondered whether the realm was also serving the Citadel. The structure of the institution encouraged those questions. At its summit stood the Conclave, a governing body composed of archmaesters. These scholars had earned distinction in specific fields and wore rings, rods, and masks made from the metals associated with their expertise. They selected the Grand Maester, who would serve the Iron Throne. They oversaw policy. They determined what future Maesters would learn. In theory, they merely preserved knowledge. In practice, they controlled the education of nearly every learned man in Westeros. Imagine the scale of that achievement. The Night's Watch guarded the wall. The faith of the Seven guided souls. Great houses ruled territories. The Citadel shaped information itself. When a raven arrived at Winterfell, carrying news from King's Landing, a maester had likely written the message, trained the bird, and maintained the network that carried it. When a lord suffered illness, a maester prescribed treatment. When a child learned history, a maester often taught the lesson. Across centuries, thousands of small acts accumulated into something immense, not political power in the ordinary sense, something quieter. As the candle burns lower in the library beneath Old Town, another question begins to emerge from the shadows. If knowledge is power, and the Citadel possesses more knowledge than any institution in Westeros, where does that power truly end? The answer is not found in armies or castles. It lies in ravens crossing the skies, in chains forged link by link, and in ancient records sleeping behind locked doors. For now, the city remains quiet. The sea murmurs against Battle Isle. The beacon atop the high tower shines over dark waters. And deep below, among books older than kingdoms, the first secrets of the Maesters wait to be uncovered. Why does a castle in the north know what happens in King's Landing hundreds of leagues away, often within days, sometimes within hours? The answer seems obvious at first. Ravens carry messages, maesters write letters, information travels. Yet the more closely you examine the system, the more extraordinary it becomes. Westeros is a continent stretching from the Wall to Dorne, larger than many real-world kingdoms combined, and still a lord in Winterfell can receive news from Old Town, the Eyrie, or Dragonstone, through a network maintained almost entirely by the Citadel. The training begins with the birds themselves. Among the links of a Maester's chain, black iron represents ravenry, one of the most vital skills taught within the Citadel. Ravens are not merely pets or messengers. They are carefully bred, trained, and studied. Certain birds learn only a single destination, while others can navigate between several locations. Maesters spend years mastering their care. When Bran Stark falls from the tower at Winterfell in A Game of Thrones, Maester Luwin sends ravens carrying urgent messages southward. The act is routine, yet behind that routine lies centuries of accumulated knowledge. The system grants the Citadel something unique. Every significant castle depends upon it. Winterfell relies on its Maester. River Run relies on its Maester. The Eyrie, Storm's End, Casterly Rock, White Harbor, Sunspear, and countless lesser keeps all rely upon men trained in Old Town. Most lords never question the arrangement because it works remarkably well. A raven can cross mountains, forests, rivers, and battlefields. Kingdoms separated by vast distances remain connected through invisible lines of communication stretching back toward the Citadel. Consider Winterfell under Lord Eddard Stark. Maester Luwin serves as healer, tutor, counselor, steward, and messenger. He teaches Bran and Rickon. He advises Catelyn Stark. He oversees communications. When Lord Eddard departs for King's Landing to become Hand of the King in 298 AC, Luwin remains one of the most trusted men in the castle. No Stark questions his presence. Indeed, his loyalty appears genuine. Yet his chain links him not to House Stark, but to an institution nearly 2,000 miles away. The same pattern appears across the realm. At Dragonstone, Maester Cresson serves Stannis Baratheon. At Castle Black, Maester Aemon advises the Night's Watch. In earlier centuries, Maesters stood beside Targaryen kings, Arryn lords, Tyrell rulers, and Martell princes. Generations came and went. Dynasties rose and collapsed. Through it all, the Citadel maintained representatives inside nearly every seat of power. Few organizations in Westerosi history achieved such reach. Even the Faith of the Seven rarely possessed influence that extended so consistently into every noble household. Why does this arrangement generate so little resistance? Part of the answer lies in the image the Citadel carefully cultivated. Maesters present themselves as servants rather than rulers. Their clothing is plain, their vows emphasize duty, their lives revolve around scholarship rather than displays of authority. Unlike knights, they do not command troops. Unlike lords, they do not inherit castles. Unlike septons, they do not preach salvation. The institution appears humble. That appearance matters. Yet information itself can become a form of power. A maester often knows which harvest failed, which heir suffers illness, which marriage negotiations are underway, and which neighboring lord is preparing for war. He reads letters, he writes letters, he preserves records. During Robert Baratheon's reign, Grand Maester Pycelle sat on the small council alongside Jon Arryn, Varys, Petyr Baelish, and Renly Baratheon. The council debated the future of the realm. Pycelle listened. Information flowed constantly through his chambers. Knowledge accumulated like water behind a dam. One of the most fascinating examples comes from Maester Aemon at Castle Black. Born Aemon Targaryen, son of Prince Maekar Targaryen, he possessed a stronger blood claim than many later kings. Yet he refused the throne and eventually joined the Night's Watch. Before taking his vows, Aemon forged his chain at the Citadel. He became a Maester first and a brother of the Watch second. Decades later, blind and ancient, he remained one of the wisest men in the realm. His story demonstrates the ideal the Citadel wished to embody, learning placed above ambition. And yet even Aemon's life hints at deeper questions. His existence created political complications during the succession crises that followed King Maekar I's death in 233 AC. The Great Council eventually selected Aegon V Targaryen, known as Aegon the Unlikely. Aemon deliberately removed himself from politics by journeying to the Wall. He understood the bloodlines and loyalties could distort judgment. If a man as honorable as Aemon worried about such influences, how much harder was neutrality for ordinary maesters scattered across the Seven Kingdoms? Why do some nobles distrust the Citadel despite centuries of service? The answer emerges most clearly through Lady Barbary Dustin of Barrowton. In A Dance with Dragons, she voices open suspicion toward maesters. Speaking to Theon Greyjoy, she argues that maesters influence great houses more than most people realize. She points toward the way children are educated. She points toward the counsel given to rulers. She points toward the quiet presence of maesters during major political events. Her accusations stop short of proving conspiracy, but they reveal that not everyone accepts the Citadel's image of perfect neutrality. The irony is striking. The institution exists to preserve knowledge, yet some of its harshest critics believe it has become too powerful precisely because of that knowledge. No army marches beneath the banner of the Citadel. No fleet sails from Old Town carrying scholars into battle. Instead, influence spreads through correspondence, education, memory, and trust. These forces leave no battlefield behind. They create no dramatic victory songs. Yet over centuries they shape the decisions of kings. As the years pass, records accumulate inside Old Town. Reports arrive from Dorne, ravens descend from the north, accounts from the Iron Islands enter the archives. Wars are documented, births recorded, deaths catalogued. Thousands upon thousands of messages pass through Meister hands. The Citadel becomes not merely a school, but the memory of Westeros itself. If a kingdom forgets its history, the Maesters can remind it. If a lord dies, the Maesters preserve the record. If a dynasty claims ancient rights, the Maesters often possess the documents that support or challenge those claims. That reality leads toward another mystery waiting in the darkness beneath Old Town. If the Citadel has spent centuries gathering knowledge from every corner of the realm, what secrets lie buried within its libraries? What books remain locked away from ordinary readers? What discoveries rest on forgotten shelves? The sea wind still drifts through the harbor outside. The beacon atop the high tower burns steadily against the night. And somewhere beneath the city, beyond rows of ancient manuscripts and dusty scrolls, doors remain closed for a reason. Why would an institution devoted to preserving knowledge place limits on who can access certain kinds of knowledge? The question hangs over the Citadel like a shadow cast by candlelight. Every novice who arrives in Old Town imagines libraries without end, shelves crowded with wisdom gathered across thousands of years. Much of that vision is true. The Citadel possesses the greatest collection of books in Westeros. Yet scattered throughout the novels are hints that not every truth is treated equally and not every subject is welcomed with the same enthusiasm. The libraries of the Citadel are legendary throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Generations of Maesters copied manuscripts by hand, preserved fading records, and collected texts from distant lands. Histories from the reign of Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen, rested beside accounts of Andal migrations. Medical treatises shared shelves with maps, genealogies, and astronomical observations. When Samwell Tarly arrives in Old Town during a feast for crows, he enters a place where knowledge has accumulated for centuries without interruption. The scale is almost overwhelming. A single lifetime would not be enough to read everything preserved there. Yet Sam quickly discovers that books alone do not reveal the whole character of the institution. The Citadel is governed by men. Men decide which texts deserve copying. Men decide which subjects are worthy of study. Men decide which ideas are dangerous, foolish, or irrelevant. That distinction becomes important because the history of Westeros contains many things that do not fit comfortably within ordinary scholarship. Dragons existed, the others exist. Prophetic dreams appear repeatedly throughout the books. Glass candles, once thought dormant, begin burning again after the return of dragons. Magic may wax and wane, but it never truly disappears. Few figures illustrate this tension more clearly than Archmaster Marwyn, known throughout the Citadel as Marwyn the Mage. Unlike many of his colleagues, Marwyn actively studies the supernatural. He has traveled widely through the Eastern world. He has visited Ashai. He has spent time among warlocks, shadowbinders, and practitioners of strange arts that most Maesters dismiss. His reputation inside the Citadel is controversial. Many Archmaesters regard him with suspicion or outright disdain. To them, Marwyn seems too willing to entertain ideas that respectable scholars prefer to reject. When Samwell encounters him, Marwyn speaks with unusual bluntness. He mocks the certainty of his fellow Maesters. He points toward truths they refuse to acknowledge. Most importantly, he introduces one of the most provocative accusations in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. Speaking of dragons and magic, Marwyn asks, "Who do you think killed all the dragons?" The line has echoed through the fandom for years because it raises a possibility that the books never fully answer. Was he speaking metaphorically? Was he describing a deliberate campaign? Or was he expressing suspicion rather than established fact? To understand why that question matters, you must remember what dragons represented. Under Aegon I, dragons forged the Seven Kingdoms into a single realm. Balerion the Black Dread reduced Harrenhal to molten ruin during the conquest. During the reigns of Aenys I and Maegor I, dragons remained instruments of royal authority. Under Jaehaerys I and Queen Alysanne, they symbolized stability and power. Even after the Dance of the Dragons devastated the Targaryen dragon population between 129 AC and 131 AC, surviving dragons remained potent symbols. Yet by the reign of Aegon III, known as the Dragonbane, the last dragons dwindled and died. The books never provide a single definitive explanation for that decline. Some dragons perished in battle during the dance. Others hatched weak and malformed in later years. Political chaos, confinement, and changing conditions all contributed. Those are the known facts. Marwyn's accusation does not replace them. Instead, it asks whether additional forces may have been involved. The theory often called the Maester conspiracy grows directly from that uncertainty. Many readers suspect that certain Maesters viewed dragons as dangerous and worked quietly to eliminate them from the world. The evidence remains incomplete, which is precisely why the theory endures. We know that many Maesters prefer rational explanations over magical ones. We know that dragons enhanced Targaryen power dramatically. We know that Marwyn openly distrusts the attitudes of his colleagues. Beyond those facts, certainty becomes difficult. Martin carefully leaves gaps. He allows questions to linger. The result is one of the most compelling mysteries in the lore because it sits at the boundary between evidence and interpretation. The Citadel's attitude toward prophecy offers another clue to its worldview. Throughout the books, prophetic visions repeatedly prove meaningful. Dennis the Dreamer foresaw the doom of Valyria. Her warning allowed House Targaryen to flee to Dragonstone roughly a century before the catastrophe destroyed the Freehold. Prince Daeron Targaryen, later Daeron the Drunken, experienced prophetic dreams. So did Daemon II Blackfyre. Melisandre receives visions in flame. Bran Stark experiences green dreams and green seer visions. The evidence that supernatural phenomena exist is substantial. Yet many Maesters remain skeptical even when confronted with examples. Their skepticism is understandable. False prophecies and mistaken interpretations are common. Mushroom's testimony in Fire and Blood frequently mixes truth, exaggeration, and scandalous rumor. Septon Eustace brings his own biases. Historians constantly struggle to separate fact from invention. The problem arises when skepticism hardens into certainty. If a scholar decides beforehand that magic cannot exist, evidence becomes easy to dismiss. Why does that matter for the future of Westeros? Because by the end of A Dance with Dragons, forces long thought extinct are returning. Dragons soar above Meereen. The others gather beyond the wall. Glass candles burn once more. Ancient powers awaken. At precisely the moment when the world becomes stranger, the Citadel remains committed to traditions shaped during centuries when magic seemed to be fading. The institution finds itself confronting realities it spent generations explaining away. The setting for these questions could hardly be more appropriate. Old Town itself is a city built atop mysteries. The high tower rises above fused black stone whose origins remain unknown. Ancient legends cling to Battle Isle. Ships arrive daily from distant shores, carrying stories, rumors, and fragments of forgotten lore. Within the Citadel, thousands of books attempt to impose order upon that uncertainty, yet the deeper you travel into the archives, the more clearly you sense a contradiction. Knowledge expands endlessly, but certainty does not. As the night deepens around the harbor, candles continue burning behind thick stone walls. Somewhere in those libraries, Samwell Tarly turns another page. Somewhere else, Marwyn the Mage prepares for a journey eastward, convinced that events of immense importance are unfolding beyond the narrow sea. The shelves remain crowded with histories and records. Yet between the lines of those books, another story waits patiently. It is the story of dragons, of vanished power, and of a question that refuses to disappear. If dragons once ruled the skies, why were so many learned men relieved to see them gone? If the Maesters truly feared dragons, when would they have possessed the greatest opportunity to act against them? The answer leads directly into one of the bloodiest chapters in Targaryen history. Between 129 AC and 131 AC, the Dance of the Dragons shattered the royal dynasty from within. Brothers fought sisters. Sons fought mothers. Great houses divided their loyalties. Dragons that had once symbolized Targaryen supremacy turned their fire against one another. By the war's end, much of the power accumulated since Aegon's conquest lay in ruins. The conflict began after the death of King Viserys I Targaryen in 129 AC. For years, Viserys had named his daughter Rhaenyra Targaryen as his heir. Lords across the realm swore oaths recognizing her succession. Yet upon the king's death, a rival faction crowned his son Aegon II Targaryen instead. The realm split between the Blacks, who supported Rhaenyra, and the Greens, who supported Aegon II. Powerful houses chose sides. House Valerion largely backed Rhaenyra. House Hightower stood firmly behind Aegon II. Soon castles, fleets, and dragons were committed to war. The scale of dragon involvement made the conflict unprecedented. Caraxes, ridden by Prince Daemon Targaryen, entered battle. Vhagar, the oldest and largest living dragon, carried Prince Aemond. Syrax, Sunfire, Meleys, Vermithor, Tessarion, Seasmoke, Dreamfire, Moondancer, and many others participated. Never before had so many dragons fought one another. During Aegon's conquest, dragons united a dynasty. During the dance, dragons became instruments of mutual destruction. Every victory carried a cost. Every battlefield left scars. One of the most devastating events occurred above the God's Eye. Prince Daemon and Prince Aemond met in a final confrontation while mounted upon Caraxes and Vhagar. Fire and blood records the battle in vivid detail. As the dragons tore at one another high above the lake, Daemon leaped from Caraxes and drove Dark Sister into Aemond's eye. both dragons fell. Both riders vanished into legend. Centuries later, the remains of Vogar and Caraxes would be found beneath the waters of the God's Eye, preserving the memory of a duel that became almost mythic in scale. Elsewhere, the losses mounted relentlessly. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen died at Rook's Rest while riding melees against Aegon II and Aemond. Prince Jacaerys Valerian fell during the Battle of the Gullet. The dragon pit of King's Landing became the site of catastrophe when a furious mob stormed the structure and killed multiple dragons, including Dreamfire. By the war's conclusion, many of the creatures that had defined Targaryen power for over a century were dead. The destruction was so severe that the realm would never fully recover. Why does the dance matter so much to the mystery of the Citadel? Because it created the conditions under which dragons could disappear. Before the war, dragons existed in significant numbers. After the war, only a handful remained. The devastation itself requires no conspiracy. The battles explain enormous losses. Fire and blood consumed dragon and rider alike. Yet the period that followed raises additional questions. The surviving dragons grew weaker. Hatchlings appeared sickly. New generations failed to restore what had been lost. The years after the dance belonged to King Aegon III, remembered as the Dragonbane. The nickname was not entirely fair. Aegon had witnessed horrors few children could endure. He saw his mother, Rhaenyra Targaryen, devoured by sunfire before his eyes. He inherited a shattered kingdom and a traumatized court. During his reign, the last surviving dragons continued to decline. The final dragon, according to the histories, was a small, stunted female whose death marked the end of the species in Westeros. Whether the king hastened that process through neglect remains debated among historians, but the extinction itself is a matter of record. This is where speculation begins to gather around the edges of known history. Fire and Blood presents evidence, testimony, and competing accounts, yet many details remain uncertain. Grand Maester Munchen compiled portions of the narrative. Septon Eustace offered another perspective. Mushroom contributed stories that ranged from insightful to outrageous. The reader often stands where historians stand in the real world, confronted by incomplete evidence and conflicting witnesses. Certainty becomes elusive. Questions survive where answers should be. Some readers point toward the influence of Old Town and House Hightower during the dance. The Greens drew much of their support from the Hightower faction. Old Town itself was one of the most important cities backing Aegon II. The Citadel stood within that same city. None of this proves coordination. Geography alone does not create conspiracy. Yet the overlap between political power, scholarship, and the anti-dragon theories surrounding later Maesters continues to attract attention. Martin seems fully aware of these connections and presents them without resolving them. What can be stated confidently is that many Maesters preferred a more orderly world than the one dragons created. Dragons upset balances of power. A single dragon rider could destroy castles that had stood for centuries. Harrenhal remained the ultimate example. When Aegon I and Balerion arrived, the strongest fortress in Westeros became a monument to melted stone. Scholars, administrators, and legal minds tend to value predictability. Dragons offered the opposite. They introduced a force beyond ordinary calculation. And yet dragons were not merely weapons. Under King Jaehaerys I and Queen Alysanne, dragons accompanied royal progresses that strengthened unity throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Silverwing carried Alysanne to the wall. Vermithor helped symbolize a reign, remembered for peace and stability. The creatures could terrify, but they could also bind a kingdom together. This complexity makes the mystery more compelling. If dragons vanished, was that unquestionably good for Westeros? The books never provide an easy answer. As the smoke of the dance clears and the graves of princes settle into silence, the realm enters a new age. The dragons are fading. The Targaryens remain on the Iron Throne, but something essential has been lost. In castles across Westeros, Maesters continue their duties. Ravens still fly. Chains still gleam against gray robes. Meanwhile, in Old Town, scholars record the end of an era. They write carefully. They preserve the facts. Yet somewhere between the lines of those records lingers a troubling possibility. The men who documented the death of the dragons may also have understood better than anyone what their disappearance truly meant. If the Citadel truly stands above politics, why do so many of the realm's most important rulers seem to depend upon its guidance at crucial moments? The question becomes more interesting the longer Westerosi history unfolds. Kings rise believing they command the realm. Lords inherit castles and banners. Yet beside nearly every throne sits a Maester, a quiet figure in gray robes whose words often carry enormous weight. Sometimes those words preserve stability. Sometimes they influence decisions whose consequences echo for generations. The most famous example in the main narrative is Grand Maester Pycelle. By the opening of A Game of Thrones, Pycelle is already an old man who has served through multiple reigns. He advised King Aerys II Targaryen during the final years of the Targaryen dynasty. He remained in office under King Robert I Baratheon after the rebellion. Later, he would continue serving during the reigns of Joffrey and Tommen. Few men in Westeros witnessed so many changes in power while retaining their position. Pycelle seemed permanent, as though kings came and went while he endured. Yet Pycelle's own testimony reveals something important. During Tyrion Lannister's investigations in A Clash of Kings, Pycelle admits that he deliberately supported Lord Tywin Lannister's interests. He respected Tywin deeply. He admired his strength and intelligence. His loyalty, while not absolute, was clearly shaped by personal preference. This confession matters because it undermines the ideal of perfect neutrality. Pycelle was still a Maester. He still wore the chain. Yet he remained a human being capable of favoritism. The consequences of that favoritism reached far into history. During Robert's rebellion, Pycelle advised King Aerys II to open the gates of King's Landing to Tywin Lannister. When the Lannister army arrived outside the city, Aerys believed Tywin had come to defend the crown. Instead, Tywin's forces sacked the capital. Sir Gregor Clegane murdered Princess Elia Martell and her children. The Targaryen regime collapsed. Pycelle later defended his recommendation by arguing that resistance would have been futile. Whether one agrees or disagrees, the episode demonstrates the extraordinary influence a trusted advisor could wield. Why does a king listen so carefully to a Maester? Part of the answer lies in expertise. Rulers require information. They need knowledge of harvests, trade, disease, weather, genealogy, law, and diplomacy. Even gifted kings cannot master every field. King Jaehaerys I relied heavily upon counselors during his long reign. Aegon V consulted learned men while pursuing reforms. Throughout the centuries, Maesters became repositories of practical knowledge. Their advice often deserved trust because it was grounded in study and experience. Yet expertise creates dependence. A ruler who cannot verify information personally must rely upon those who provide it. Imagine a lord receiving reports about famine in a distant region. Imagine a king reviewing succession records stretching back hundreds of years. Imagine a prince seeking treatment for a mysterious illness. In each case, the Maester becomes indispensable. The advisor who possesses information inevitably shapes how that information is understood. Influence emerges naturally from the relationship. The Targaryen kings experienced this reality repeatedly. Fire and Blood introduces numerous Grand Maesters whose recommendations affected royal policy. Grand Maester Bennifer served during the early reign of Jaehaerys I. Grand Maester Elessar participated in court affairs during turbulent periods. Grand Maester Orwyle became deeply entangled in the politics surrounding the Dance of the Dragons. None of these men ruled the kingdom, yet each occupied a position close enough to power that their actions mattered. Their decisions entered the stream of history, even when their names faded from public memory. The dance provides one of the clearest illustrations. Orwyle initially attempted to navigate between rival factions at court. When Viserys I died and the succession crisis erupted, neutrality became increasingly difficult. The Greens crowned Aegon II. The Blacks rallied around Rhaenyra. Advisors found themselves pulled into opposing camps. Orwyle's choices ultimately contributed to his downfall. After the war, he was executed, despite efforts to justify his conduct. His fate demonstrates how dangerous proximity to power could become. What is striking about these stories is how rarely Maesters appear as villains in the traditional sense. Pycelle serves his interests, yet he genuinely believes stability matters. Orwyle becomes trapped within political chaos rather than orchestrating it. Many castle maesters devote themselves sincerely to healing the sick and educating children. Martin's world rarely offers simple conspirators lurking behind curtains. Instead, institutions are populated by flawed individuals whose virtues and weaknesses shape events. The Citadel is no exception. Still, patterns emerge. Consider how frequently a Maester serves as the primary source of knowledge within a noble household. Young heirs learn history from him. Lords seek his counsel. Ladies depend upon his medical skill. During crises, his voice often reaches the ruler before any other. The relationship resembles a blend of teacher, physician, secretary, and advisor. Over decades, such influence can become profound. A maester who serves faithfully for 30 years may know a family better than some of its own relatives. One of the most beloved examples remains Maester Luwin at Winterfell. His loyalty to House Stark appears genuine from beginning to end. He comforts Bran after the boys fall. He assists Catelyn during moments of uncertainty. He attempts to protect Rickon and Bran when Winterfell collapses under Theon's occupation. His final moments are marked by compassion rather than ambition. Luwin reminds readers why the institution earned trust in the first place. Without men like him, the Citadel's reputation would never have survived for centuries. Yet the contrast between Lewin and Pycelle highlights an important truth. The Citadel is not a single mind. It is a vast institution spread across generations and kingdoms. Some Maesters embody wisdom and selflessness. Others display vanity, bias, or political calculation. When readers search for hidden truths about the Citadel, they sometimes imagine a perfectly coordinated organization directing events from Old Town. The reality presented in the books is more complicated. Institutions gain influence not only through secret plans, but through thousands of ordinary relationships built over centuries. As candles burn in chambers from Winterfell to Sunspear, Maesters continue their work. They treat wounds, draft letters, teach lessons, and advise rulers, most likely never imagine themselves as participants in some grand design. Yet history often turns on small conversations held behind closed doors. A recommendation, a warning, a piece of information delivered at the right moment. In the quiet spaces where power and knowledge meet, the influence of the Citadel becomes difficult to measure. That uncertainty leads naturally toward the men who challenge the institution from within. For some of the Citadel's sharpest critics are not outsiders at all. They are Maesters themselves. Why do some of the Citadel's most learned men seem to distrust the institution that educated them? Few questions reveal the hidden tensions within Old Town more clearly. The greatest challenges to the Citadel's worldview often come not from kings, priests, or warriors, but from scholars who have spent their lives inside its walls. These men know the archives, they understand the traditions, they have forged their chains link by link, yet after mastering the institution's teachings, some emerge convinced that important truths are being ignored. No figure embodies this conflict more vividly than Archmaester Marwyn. Within the Citadel, he occupies an unusual position. He is respected for his knowledge, yet regarded with suspicion by many colleagues. Samwell Tarly learns that Marwyn has studied subjects considered disreputable by conventional scholars. He has traveled farther east than most masters ever dream of going. He has visited Ashai by the Shadow, a city wrapped in mystery, even by the standards of Planetos. He has spoken with warlocks, shadowbinders, and practitioners of arcane traditions that most archmaesters dismiss as superstition. The contrast between Marwyn and the Conclave is striking. While many maesters prefer orderly explanations, Marwyn follows evidence wherever it leads. If glass candles burn, he accepts that they burn. If dragons return, he accepts that dragons have returned. If magic demonstrates itself repeatedly, he refuses to pretend otherwise. This attitude places him at odds with colleagues who spent decades teaching that the age of magic had effectively ended. To Marwyn, the problem is not ignorance. The problem is intellectual rigidity. One of the most fascinating artifacts associated with his studies is the glass candle. According to Citadel tradition, these strange objects were created in Valyria before the Doom. They are carved from obsidian, a substance often called dragon glass, in Westeros. For generations, the candles remained dark and cold despite every attempt to ignite them. Then something changed. By the time Sam reaches Old Town, the candles are burning again. No ordinary flame feeds them, no oil sustains them, yet they shine. The implications are extraordinary. Ancient texts claim that burning glass candles allow communication across vast distances. Some accounts suggest they permit visions of distant places. Others hint at dreams and messages transmitted from mind to mind. The books never fully explain their capabilities. Martin deliberately preserves the mystery. What matters is that the candles function once more at the same historical moment when dragons have returned to the world through Daenerys Targaryen. The coincidence is difficult to ignore. Why would such developments alarm portions of the Citadel? Because they threaten assumptions that have guided generations of scholarship. For centuries, the institution flourished in a world where magic appeared increasingly weak. Dragons were extinct. The others had faded into legend. Most noblemen regarded tales of sorcery as children's stories. Rational explanations became dominant. Now those certainties are eroding. Facts once considered impossible are becoming undeniable. Another intriguing figure emerges in Old Town during these events, Alaris the Sphinx. To most readers at first, Alaris appears to be an exceptionally talented novice studying at the Citadel. The young scholar demonstrates intelligence, curiosity, and unusual skill. Only later do clues reveal a deeper truth. Alaris is almost certainly Sorella Sand, one of Prince Oberyn Martell's daughters. Disguised while pursuing knowledge in Old Town, the name itself forms an elegant reversal. Sorella becomes Alaris. This detail matters for more than its cleverness. Through Alaris, Martin shows that the Citadel continues attracting brilliant minds from across the realm. Dorne, historically independent and culturally distinct from much of Westeros, still recognizes the institution's importance. Sorella seeks knowledge that cannot easily be found elsewhere. Her presence reminds us that despite its mysteries and flaws, the Citadel remains the greatest center of learning in the known world west of the Narrow Sea. Yet even among gifted students, certain questions linger. Why are some subjects discouraged? Why do particular scholars earn reputations as eccentrics? Why does Marwyn speak of hidden truths with such urgency? These questions become sharper when viewed against the backdrop of current events. Daenerys has hatched 3 living dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion. Beyond the wall, strange reports reach Castle Black, White's Walk. The others gather strength. Ancient forces are stirring across the world simultaneously. Marwyn responds to these developments with action. Near the end of a feast for crows, he decides to leave Old Town entirely. Rather than remain among debates and academic discussions, he departs for Slaver's Bay. His destination is Daenerys Targaryen. He believes she stands at the center of events that will reshape the future. Most importantly, he fears that other forces may reach her first. His departure is not framed as a scholarly expedition. It feels more like a race against time. The contrast between Marwyn and another famous Maester helps illuminate the broader theme. Consider Maester Aemon at the Wall. Like Marwyn, Aemon recognizes the reality of prophecy, dragons, and supernatural forces. When Samwell speaks of Daenerys, Aemon immediately grasps her significance. He understands that ancient predictions and bloodlines may matter more than many scholars admit, yet Aemon approaches these mysteries with humility and compassion rather than confrontation. He seeks understanding rather than institutional conflict. Why do both men arrive at similar conclusions despite living very different lives? The answer may lie in experience. Eamon lived through the decline of dragons and witnessed the consequences of political upheaval. Marwyn traveled beyond the boundaries that constrain most Maesters. Both encountered realities that could not be explained away. Their lives suggest that the farther one moves from comfortable assumptions, the harder it becomes to deny the existence of deeper forces shaping the world. As the night settles over Old Town, strange lights burn behind stone walls. In hidden chambers, glass candles glow where they remained dark for generations. Young students study by ordinary lamplight, unaware that ancient powers are awakening around them. The conclave continues its deliberations. Ravens arrive from distant lands carrying fragments of troubling news. And somewhere beyond the horizon, 3 dragons cross the skies once more. The age that many Maesters believed had ended forever may only have been sleeping. Why was the Citadel built in one of the oldest and most mysterious locations in Westeros? To answer that question, you must look beyond the Maesters themselves and examine the ground beneath their feet. Old Town is not merely an ancient city. It is a place layered with unanswered questions, a crossroads where history, legend, and archaeology overlap. Long before the first Maester forged a chain link, long before the Andals crossed the narrow sea, something significant already stood here. The greatest mystery is Battle Isle. Upon this island rises the High Tower, seat of House Hightower, and one of the most recognizable landmarks in the Seven Kingdoms. Yet according to the world of ice and fire, the massive stone tower rests upon an older foundation made from fused black stone. This material appears nowhere else in Westeros in such a form. The stone is smooth, dark, and strangely resistant to weathering. Most importantly, nobody knows who built it. The comparison that troubles scholars is not found nearby. It lies thousands of miles away. Similar fused black stone appears in Eshai by the Shadow, at the eastern edge of the known world. It appears in parts of the Basilisk Isles. It appears in the ruined city of Yin, deep within Sithorios. These locations share no obvious political or cultural connection. Yet they contain structures built from remarkably similar materials. The implications are unsettling. Either multiple civilizations discovered identical techniques, or traces of a forgotten culture survive across vast distances. The books never provide a definitive explanation. Some theories connect the stone to the great empire of the Dawn, a semi-legendary civilization mentioned in Eastern traditions. Others speculate about unknown peoples predating recorded history. Theories remain theories. What matters for our story is that the Citadel grew beside one of the greatest archaeological mysteries in Martin's world. Every Archmaster who walked beneath the High Tower lived in the shadow of evidence that entire chapters of history may have vanished. Old Town's age deepens the puzzle. Many locations in Westeros possess founding legends. Winterfell is associated with Bran the Builder. Storm's End is linked to Durin God's Grief. Casterly Rock traces its history to the Lannisters, and the trickster Lan the Clever. Old Town, however, seems older than many of the stories surrounding it. References to the city reach back into the Dawn Age. By the time written history begins to emerge, Old Town is already established. The city appears less like a new settlement and more like a place people inherited from the distant past. Why does this matter when discussing the Citadel? Because institutions are shaped by their surroundings. A school founded in King's Landing would develop differently from one founded at the Wall. The Citadel emerged in a city connected to ancient trade routes, old mysteries, and powerful traditions. Sailors arrived carrying stories from distant shores. Merchants brought goods from the Summer Isles, Lys, Pentos, Tyrosh, and beyond. Knowledge flowed through Old Town long before it was organized into libraries. The city became a natural gathering place for information. House Hightower played a crucial role in this process. Unlike the martial reputation of houses such as Stark, Baratheon, or Greyjoy, the Hightowers often cultivated learning, trade, and religion. The Starry Sept stood in Old Town for centuries as the center of the Faith of the Seven before the Great Sept of Baelor was built in King's Landing. The Citadel flourished nearby. In many ways, Old Town became the intellectual and spiritual heart of southern Westeros. The arrangement was not accidental. The city attracted institutions devoted to preserving order and knowledge. This convergence sometimes produces intriguing questions. The Faith, the Citadel, and House Hightower all became powerful forces centered in the same city. Each exercised influence across the realm. Each benefited from stability. During different periods, their interests aligned naturally. That does not prove secret coordination. It does suggest that Old Town developed into something more than a regional center. The city became a place where major institutions shaped the broader direction of Westerosi civilization. The arrival of Aegon the Conqueror illustrates this significance. After the Field of Fire in 1 AC, where Aegon's dragons defeated the combined forces of King Meryn the Ninth Gardener and King Loren the First Lannister, the political landscape transformed rapidly. Yet Old Town chose accommodation rather than resistance. Lord Manfred Hightower opened the city to Aegon. The High Septon reportedly experienced a vision and urged peace. As a result, Old Town escaped the destruction that befell places such as Harrenhal. The city preserved its wealth, influence, and institutions while adapting to a new dynasty. That decision proved remarkably successful. During the centuries of Targaryen rule, Old Town remained one of the largest and richest cities in Westeros. The Citadel expanded, its libraries grew, its network of Maesters spread ever farther. Meanwhile, the mysteries beneath the city remained unresolved. Scholars cataloged histories stretching back thousands of years, yet the origins of the fused black stone beneath the Hightower continued to defy explanation. Knowledge advanced, but certain questions endured. One detail feels especially significant when viewed through the lens of the larger story. The Maesters often present themselves as champions of reason. They value evidence, they demand proof. They seek explanations grounded in observation. Yet their own headquarters stands beside structures that seem to belong more to myth than to ordinary history. Every day they pass reminders that the world contains mysteries older than any archive. Every day they work within sight of evidence that not everything can be neatly categorized. As darkness settles across whispering sound and waves break softly against the foundations of Battle Isle, the Hightower continues its silent vigil. The beacon shines over ships entering the harbor. The Citadel's windows glow with candlelight. Students pore over manuscripts. Archmaesters debate questions of history and science. Yet beneath all of it rests the ancient black stone, older than kingdoms, older than dynasties, perhaps older than memory itself. It serves as a quiet reminder that even the greatest scholars do not possess every answer, and that realization leads us toward the largest mystery of all. Whether the hidden truth about the Citadel is a conspiracy, a misunderstanding, or something far more subtle. What if the greatest secret of the Citadel is not that it controls Westeros, but that it has been trying to guide Westeros away from dangers most people barely understand? By this point in the story, two competing images of the Maesters have emerged. In one, they are cautious scholars whose skepticism protects civilization from superstition and chaos. In the other, they are a hidden force that suppresses magic, influences rulers, and quietly shapes the future of the realm. The truth may not lie entirely within either picture. Martin rarely builds his institutions around simple answers. The strongest argument against the idea of a vast, unified conspiracy is the Citadel itself. Across centuries, the institution produces remarkably different men. Maester Aemon becomes a figure of wisdom and self-sacrifice at the Wall. Maester Luwin serves House Stark with genuine devotion. Cresson risks his life attempting to save Stannis Baratheon from what he perceives as dangerous influences. Pycelle pursues political calculations. Marwyn studies forbidden subjects. These men share an education, yet their values differ dramatically. Such diversity makes perfect coordination difficult to imagine. At the same time, institutions develop cultures, whether they intend to or not. The Citadel trains generations of scholars to value observation, evidence, and practical knowledge. It rewards medicine, engineering, mathematics, and administration. It treats many supernatural claims with suspicion. None of this requires secret meetings in hidden chambers. Cultural assumptions can spread naturally. 1,000 maesters raised within the same intellectual tradition may arrive at similar conclusions without receiving explicit orders. This possibility becomes particularly interesting when considering dragons. Imagine yourself as an archmaster living a century after the Dance of the Dragons. You study records describing entire castles burned from the sky. You read accounts of Vhagar reducing armies to ash. You examine reports from Tumbleton, Rook's Rest, and the Dragon Pit. Would you view dragons as magnificent wonders? Certainly, but would you also see them as existential threats to political stability? Almost certainly. A scholar could oppose dragons sincerely while believing he was protecting the realm. The same logic applies to magic more broadly. The histories of Westeros contain countless disasters connected to supernatural forces. The Doom destroyed Valyria. Blood magic appears repeatedly alongside tragedy. The others nearly overwhelmed humanity during the Long Night according to ancient traditions. Even prophecies often produce unintended consequences. A cautious institution might conclude that magic brings more danger than benefit. Such a conclusion would not necessarily be malicious. It could emerge from genuine concern. Why does this interpretation matter? Because it transforms the mystery. Instead of imagining villains hiding behind bookshelves, we begin examining competing visions of civilization. One vision prioritizes knowledge, stability, and gradual progress. The other accepts uncertainty, prophecy, and supernatural power as unavoidable realities. The tension between those perspectives runs throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. Characters repeatedly struggle to determine which forces deserve trust. No location illustrates this conflict more vividly. than the wall. For centuries, many Southern nobles treated tales of the others as legends. Maesters often shared that skepticism. Yet readers know the threat is real. Rangers encounter whites. The Night's Watch loses men beyond the wall. Lord Commander Gior Mormont sends the Great Ranging in part because disturbing signs are multiplying. Eventually, Samwell Tarly kills another using dragon glass. Reality refuses to conform to comfortable assumptions. This is where the Citadel's greatest vulnerability emerges. Its strength lies in accumulated knowledge. Its weakness lies in the possibility that accumulated knowledge can become accumulated certainty. If generations of scholars convince themselves that certain phenomena are impossible, they may struggle to recognize those phenomena when they return. The return of dragons presents one challenge. The return of the others presents another. Ancient threats do not care whether respectable scholars believe in them. Samwell Tarly occupies a fascinating position within this struggle. He begins the story as an awkward young nobleman terrified of disappointing his father, Lord Randall Tarly. By the time he reaches Old Town, he has traveled beyond the wall, witnessed supernatural events, and survived encounters that many Maesters would consider impossible. He carries experiences the Citadel desperately needs to understand. Yet he also enters an institution predisposed to question extraordinary claims. Through Sam, the story places first-hand experience directly against established doctrine. Another subtle detail deserves attention. The Citadel often describes itself as the guardian of memory. Histories are copied, records preserved, knowledge cataloged. Yet memory can shape the future as much as it preserves the past. The stories an institution chooses to emphasize become part of civilization's foundation. The stories it neglects gradually fade. Over centuries, these choices accumulate. They influence how entire societies understand themselves. None of this proves the existence of a secret cabal directing events from beneath Old Town. The books never provide such confirmation. What they do provide is something more interesting. They show an institution grappling with profound uncertainty while presenting itself as a source of certainty. They show scholars attempting to explain a world that stubbornly refuses to remain predictable. They show intelligent people making judgments that sometimes help and sometimes hinder. As midnight approaches over Old Town, the harbor grows quiet. Most candles in the city have burned low. Inside the Citadel, however, a few lights still shine. A novice studies ancient histories. An archmeister reviews reports arriving by raven. Somewhere a glass candle burns with its strange, unwavering glow. Outside beyond the city walls, the wider world continues changing. Dragons live again, ancient powers stir, and whether the Citadel is prepared or not, the age it thought had passed is drawing closer with every passing night. What is the hidden truth about the Citadel and its Maesters? After traveling through Old Town's libraries, the courts of kings, the ruins left by dragons, and the mysteries preserved in ancient stone, the answer remains elusive. That uncertainty is not a flaw in the story. It is the point. George R.R. Martin fills his world with institutions that contain both wisdom and blindness, both virtue and self-interest. The Citadel may be the finest example of all. The strongest evidence suggests that the Maesters are exactly what they claim to be: scholars, healers, teachers, and servants of the realm. Without them, much of Westeros would function poorly. Castles would lose vital communications, medical knowledge would fragment, histories would disappear. Children of noble houses would grow up with fewer opportunities to learn. Men such as Lewin, Aemon, and Creason demonstrate the institution at its best. Their lives are marked by sacrifice rather than ambition. Yet another truth exists alongside that one. Institutions inevitably develop priorities. The Citadel values order, it values reason, it values explanations that can be studied, recorded, and verified. Dragons challenge those priorities. Prophecy challenges them. The return of the others challenges them most of all. When supernatural forces reappear after centuries of decline, the institution finds itself confronting realities that do not fit comfortably within its established worldview. The tension is visible throughout the books. Perhaps that is why Marwyn's accusations remain so compelling. He never presents a signed confession. He never uncovers a secret document proving the existence of a coordinated conspiracy. Instead, he asks questions. Why were dragons allowed to fade? Why do so many archmaesters dismiss magic despite mounting evidence? Why are certain subjects treated with suspicion while others are celebrated? Questions possess a unique power. Once asked, they become difficult to silence. The irony is almost beautiful. The Citadel teaches students to investigate mysteries, yet it becomes one of the greatest mysteries in the story. Its archives contain answers to countless questions, but not to all of them. Its scholars preserve knowledge, stretching back thousands of years, yet some of the oldest chapters remain unreadable. Even the origins of the city surrounding it are uncertain. The institution devoted to certainty rests upon foundations of mystery. Old Town itself mirrors this contradiction. During the day, the city feels tangible and comprehensible. Merchants unload cargo along the quays. Septons walk beneath the shadow of the high tower. Fishermen navigate the waters of whispering sound. Students hurry between lectures and libraries. Everything appears orderly, yet beneath the surface lie fused black stones whose builders are forgotten, ancient legends whose meanings are unclear, and questions that survive every attempt to answer them. Perhaps the hidden truth is not that the Maesters secretly control Westeros. Perhaps the deeper truth is that they have spent centuries trying to understand a world that refuses to be fully understood. They organize knowledge because knowledge matters. They challenge superstition because superstition can be dangerous. They seek rational explanations because rational explanations often save lives. Yet the world of A Song of Ice and Fire contains dragons, green seers, prophetic dreams, glass candles, and others. Some mysteries remain larger than any archive. As readers, we possess a perspective unavailable to most characters. We know the others are real. We know Daenerys Targaryen hatched living dragons in the funeral pyre of Khal Drogo. We know Bran Stark's journey beyond the wall leads toward ancient powers hidden beneath tangled roots. We know magic is returning. The Citadel stands on the edge of that transformation. Whether it adapts, resists, or misunderstands what is coming remains one of the great unanswered questions left hanging over the books. And so we return to where the journey began. Deep beneath Old Town, a candle burns in the darkness. Its flame flickers against shelves crowded with histories copied by patient hands over countless generations. Ravens shift quietly above the beams. Chains glimmer in the half-light. Somewhere beyond the walls, the sea wind moves across the harbor and brushes the ancient stones of Battle Isle. The scholars continue their work. The mysteries endure. And in the silence between turning pages, the hidden truth about the Citadel remains just beyond reach, waiting in the shadows beside that solitary flame. When you step back from the kings and dragons and prophecies, the Citadel reveals something essential about Martin's world. The greatest powers are not always the loudest ones. A dragon's shadow passes over a city and everyone looks up. A king sits upon the iron throne and every eye turns toward him. But a maester copies a manuscript by candlelight, teaches a child how to read, records a treaty, or sends a raven into the dawn, and almost nobody notices. Yet centuries later, the dragon is gone, the king is forgotten, and the words remain. The Citadel exists in that quiet space where knowledge outlives power. What makes the institution so fascinating is that it embodies both wisdom and limitation at the same time. The Maesters preserve civilization. They carry learning through wars, famines, rebellions, and dynastic collapse. Without them, much of Westeros would drift into darkness. Yet the very habits that make them valuable can also become weaknesses. A man who spends his life seeking certainty may struggle when confronted by mystery. A scholar trained to doubt legends may find himself unprepared when the legends begin walking again. Again and again throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, Martin returns to the same idea. Human beings crave order. They build castles, laws, faiths, and institutions because the world is frighteningly large. The Citadel is one of humanity's grandest attempts to impose structure upon chaos. It gathers scattered fragments of knowledge and arranges them into something understandable. Yet beyond every map lies an unknown shore. Beyond every history lies a forgotten age. Beyond every explanation lies another question. The world remains larger than the systems designed to contain it. That is why the mystery of the Maesters can never be reduced to a simple conspiracy. Even if certain archmaesters feared dragons, even if some scholars quietly opposed magic, even if political influence occasionally flowed through chains and ravens instead of crowns and swords, those possibilities are only part of the story. The deeper truth concerns the tension between knowledge and wonder. The Citadel represents the desire to explain the world. Dragons, green seers, prophetic dreams, and the others represent the parts of the world that refuse to be explained completely. You can see that tension everywhere in the history of Westeros. It exists when Maester Aemon studies ancient prophecies despite his training. It exists when Samwell Tarly carries proof of impossible things into halls filled with skeptical scholars. It exists when Marwyn the Mage abandons certainty and sails toward the unknown. These characters are not choosing between truth and falsehood. They are choosing how much mystery they are willing to allow into their understanding of reality. In Martin's world, wisdom often begins when certainty ends. And perhaps that is why the Citadel feels so real. It is not merely a place of books, it is a reflection of humanity itself. Every generation inherits fragments of knowledge from those who came before. Every generation believes it understands more than the last. Every generation eventually discovers that the world still contains secrets waiting beyond the edge of the lantern's glow. The archives grow larger, the questions grow older, the search continues. So as the night settles fully over Old Town, you return once more to the chamber beneath the city. The sea whispers faintly against distant stone. Ravens sleep among the rafters. Endless shelves disappear into darkness beyond the reach of the light. There, beside a single candle burning in the depths of the Citadel, chains gleam softly in the shadows. Ancient books rest unopened, and the greatest mysteries of Westeros wait in perfect silence for the next curious hand to turn a page.